Hi, I'm Philippa. I'm the Audit Director and head up the Audit and Financial Reporting section at Wilson Partners for the group. I've been here with the business for over 13 years and was brought on originally in the early days of Wilson Partners, tasked with building a function and developing the team that is here today. We're here today to talk about audit and financial reporting and kind of answer some questions that people might be interested in. So we've got two members of the team here with me, Natalie and Rebecca. Natalie, so you've recently joined Wilson Partners, but tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm a senior manager in the audit and financial reporting team, and I joined Wilson Partners early this year, having been at my previous firm for sort of over 7 years. I was really interested in audit sort of from a trainee, just to get to know businesses and how they work and how to help them really.
And Rebecca, so you've been here kind of since the early days as well.
Yeah, so I've been here about 7.5 years. I started as a baby accountant, not knowing what a debit and credit was, and sort of grown with the company. And I'm now a senior manager within the audit and financial reporting team.
For those kind of that don't know, what is an audit? Why would you need one?
Yeah, so I guess kind of just broadly speaking, an audit is sort of an independent review of the financial statements within a certain materiality threshold to give a true and fair view of the financials at a certain point of time. So the idea is that a stakeholder in the business would look at the financials and gain comfort over the figures that they're seeing.
And is it just kind of limits that drive an audit? Why might people want an audit?
Yeah, so there are limits involved. So a company that exceeds a small company's threshold, so enters into that medium or above size, would legally require an audit within the UK. But there's also other factors. So we've touched on private equity investors. So quite often these private equity investors would like their investments to have an audit and gain comfort over those financials, as well as if you're part of a larger group, you might exceed the thresholds on a group level, in which case you might be a small company, but you might still require an audit. So there's lots of different instances where you would need one.
It's also a good opportunity to sort of look at internal controls and sort of those sorts of areas. So we often find, and shockingly enough, that some people choose to have one just to sort of look at those internal control areas, as well to provide sort of confidence in their numbers. So if they're going through a buy strategy, a sale or something like that, you might find that they want that sort of extra layer of support, and it often makes them stand out from the crowd in one of those situations, or to offer confidence to sort of lenders or something like that. So you might find that they opt for one for that reason.
What about things like your access to funds from suppliers or maybe winning contracts for work? How relevant would an audit be for that side?
Yeah, so I think an audit, if you've got an audited set of financial statements, I think it just puts you above maybe your competitors who maybe don't have an audit, because it just shows that there's sort of good controls and systems within the business, and an audited set of accounts can be really valuable if you're looking to seek new suppliers and enter into any credit arrangements.
And in terms of kind of auditing, I think a lot of myths around it just being about the numbers, but I think in recent years there's been some quite big changes into standards that have meant it's been more around other areas, including kind of people and IT.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been so many changes recently within the audit sort of world, and especially the introduction of ISA 315 and the kind of people side of the business and the IT controls. And it does require us to perhaps ask a few more questions when we start up an audit, but it's actually really valuable from a company's perspective, because it can highlight where there might be weaknesses within their people, processes and controls, and essentially help mitigate a business against fraud and IT risks, which is incredibly valuable in this world where IT is becoming ever more prevalent in our day-to-day life.
So would that be an additional kind of layer of time that people might need to expect in terms of that audit side? Because I think it's probably, people think it's the numbers, but actually it's a lot more these days.
Yeah, so I think in sort of a initial, perhaps a first year audit, there would be a little bit more time required for those initial conversations. But then we would keep that on our permanent file, and as the years go on, yes, we might update them as things change, but it's more of an upfront discussion, and then we will just amend as needed. So I would say it's an investment at the start of the process, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be as timely going forwards.
I also find it's a really good opportunity to sort of enter that conversation piece. I think if we were just looking at the numbers, we might not necessarily get to know the company as much and sort of build that relationship. We often find these conversation pieces that, although they are a requirement, so we have to do them, it's also quite a good chance to sort of build that relationship and get to know the client through those face-to-face Teams calls and conversations.
I was always told that the best conversation you'd ever have is with the cleaner, because they'll tell you absolutely everything you want to know about the company and what's really going on. So it's all about being nosy. So from point of view of why would you pick an audit with Wilson Partners? There's a lot of competitors on the market. There's a lot of big firms. There's a lot of small firms. I think we sit perfectly in that SME offering, but why us?
Yeah, so I guess besides sort of the expertise that we have in the sector, obviously we try and make audits as seamless as possible. We provide queries ahead of time so that once the audit week rolls around, the finance team on the client side are prepped and they've got information ready for the team. We also introduce sort of a variety of technology to make the audits run smoother. So for example, we use a program called Inflow that tracks our audit requests, and it just limits email traffic and helps everyone on our side and on the client side keep track of what we need and how things are going. And that's proved to be really, really useful in recent sort of months as well.
And is there any other sort of technology pieces we're bringing to the party? I know it's a hot topic with things like AI in the audit world, so I think it's become much more of, I guess, less of a tick and bash exercise, but more around some judgments and thinking critically around the risks of the business.
Yeah, we definitely find sort of the programs we're getting for, like Data Snipper, for example, that does a lot of the sort of pulling information together, sort of frees up the more time to sort of focus on the more detailed areas that are actually more valuable, including those sort of conversation pieces. And as Natalie said, just keeping down that email traffic and making sure the sort of tracking on inflow, for example, means that we're not sending sort of 50 emails or like getting sort of so much paper. We often find we get it across, we can use Data Snipper that collates it for us, and then sort of we track it on inflow, and you're not finding such 50, 60 emails exchanging hands. And then we have a nice sort of conversations on sort of Teams calls and face-to-face where we can. And it just sort of makes everything run so much more smoothly and efficiently.
So I think since COVID, there's been a move towards people working at home. How are we approaching that in terms of on-site audits, remote auditing? What do we do?
We do a mixture here, and it's really down to the client's preference. So we can go on site to their offices for a whole week, for part of the week. We can work around, whatever your flexible working arrangements are. We also do quite a lot of audits remotely with the use of things like Inflow and Teams. That makes things really easy, especially with things like if you might have Xero, where we can pull invoices directly from there. So we're really flexible around what the client wants and what's going to work best for the audit, really.
And what would we say if a client's preparing for their first audit? They've suddenly been acquired by private equity, or they've had a bumper year and they suddenly reach the limits. How can they prepare to make it not a painful process?
Yeah, so there's quite a few things that can be done. So I would say the first and foremost is just ensuring that the financial statements or the financial information is up to date. So any year-end journals are sort of put through on your accounting software, and just reviewing your internal controls and systems, because that is something that we will ask about, especially for a first-year audit, and making sure that the finance team and other people within the business know exactly what's going on, really.
It's also sort of making sure you're prepared for that week. So we often find audits run so much more smoother when that team is available during that week and on hand to sort of answer our questions and get that information available, whether that be on site physically or whether they're available for Teams calls throughout that week. And of course, I always say when I'm on site, just being offered a nice tea or coffee and really goes down well and just makes us feel a little bit more comfortable. So.
I know the trainees have been known to rate the location based on the coffee
rate the
supply.
Coffee machine, so.
And what about things that they may not have thought about? So I guess because we're looking at audits and we're looking at a bit more detail, things like going concern, and budgets and cash flows, I guess that's stuff they might not see as their day-to-day role, but I guess having an awareness that we need that information and how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where our sort of initial audit requests come into play. So that covers those things such as, going concern and subsequent events that maybe might not be on the forefront of a finance team's mind, but it just gives them that time ahead of the audit to think about it and also pull together what we might need, for example, a budget.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's been a massive, ever since sort of COVID and like that, it's been such a massive push within the audit side to make sure we've got all the information we need to sort of support going concern and subsequent events, because it's just so much more of a riskier area than it used to be. So we really have to be on top of that.
So I think a client might think you're testing absolutely everything, but that's really not the case.
No, definitely not.
What do they need to expect in terms of how much comfort you are getting on those financial statements?
Yeah, so within an audit, we work to a level of materiality, which is set and agreed with the client. So our focus will be things that might materially impact the financial statement. So we don't go and test every single revenue invoice or every single expense invoice that there is. We'll pick a sample and we'll test those, and essentially, to gain enough comfort. So although we might send a sample of, however many that might be 30, 40, or dependent on the client, it's not everything. And I think that's something that perhaps people don't automatically think of when they think of audit.
And we're also there to work with you. We're not there to find your £10 error on your purchase invoice where you've accidentally done a typo. As in, there is a materiality level, and we're there to work with with you, not to pick out the tiny little £10, £20
I think
here and there.
no one likes inspection, so I think
Yeah.
it's sometimes that perception that you're there to find maybe fault rather
Yeah.
than to help. But I think over the years we've been quite good in assisting clients improve and develop some of their weaknesses and controls and issues that maybe they hadn't thought about, and make them a more robust finance function.
I definitely think you key there. We're actually there to help, even though it is a requirement and it does need to be done. We're not there to sort of trip anyone up. We're there to do our job, and I think it's always goes smoother if people realise we're there to help, because no one wants mistakes going on in the background without anyone raising them. And actually, if we find them, it means that they probably won't happen going forward. So it's actually a bonus, really.
And we kind of touch quite heavily on, I guess, statutory audits and those company audits that we do, but I know there's much more in terms of other audits that either are required by regulation or that we choose to offer. Can you tell me a little bit more about them?
Yeah, so we offer quite a wide variety of audits here. So obviously, your statutory audit we've sort of touched on a lot, but other things such as FCA audits, SRA audits, so that's where a company would hold client money. We do grant audits. So for example, Innovate grants, they require audits at various stages of that grant process. And then sort of pension scheme audits as well is something that we do.
You touched on client money. What is client money for those people that don't know?
So client money is essentially where you as a business would hold money on behalf of your client. So as part of that, there's a requirement to audit those sort of financials and ensure that money's being essentially held correctly and not used by the business itself.
It's always a very different scenario because there's not so much a materiality limit on that one, because it's not your money effectively. So we have to go in quite a lot of detail, make sure we sort of can trace every sort of pound going on in that one.
And I know we don't obviously have international coverage, but what if we've got kind of a UK subsidiary that's a part of a large group? Can we still assist?
Yeah, definitely. We work very sort of closely with component auditors to make sure we can sort of provide the information they need to make sort of get comfort over the overall group numbers, and that does feed into it. So yeah, we definitely do that, as well as often we're the parties that often are auditing the group who also reach out to component auditors. So we actually see it both ways, which is quite nice because you get the understanding of what's required from both ends, and you can also empathise and make sure you're working.
I've seen quite a lot of, I guess, clients that don't want to maybe use that larger international audit firm, and therefore can have a more local and more personable feel, but still get the desired result that they want.
Exactly, yeah. We often find they don't want to use the sort of auditor that's doing the big group. They would like to use us, and we then can work closely with the group auditors, and they still get that sort of personal touch and adding value from potentially using Wilson Partners, who are a bit smaller, and we're sort of more in touch with sort of their day-to-day and sort of what they're experiencing from experiencing ourselves, and we can work quite closely with them and then feed into the group.
And what about on that? I mean, I hear over the years the big bugbears of, I've got a different trainee asking the same questions, I could tell them anything and they'll go away.
Definitely not on that one. So we're obviously, like, for example, I've been there sort of 7.5 years, and although you might have not exactly the same team, you often do have, especially the senior members, you'll see sort of a similar person, or you might watch a trainee grow up to that senior level throughout their time. A bit like I saw some clients, I might have been the junior and now I'm the manager on it, and you really get to know that client, you get to know the information. But even if the teams do change, we do hold very, very good data on past years, so we can definitely pass that on.